Hey, I'm JD. Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and please hit like, and I'll make more videos like this one. I'm on the bench today and I'm looking at a very old carriage clock. This is not it. This is a Mappin and Webb carriage clock. And I'm going to go right out of Wikipedia here and do a little reading. So the carriage clock is a small spring-driven clock designed for traveling, developed in the 19th century in France. The first carriage clock was invented by Abram Louis Breguet for Emperor Napoleon in 1812. The case is usually plain or gilded brass. It's rectangular with a carrying handle and is often set with glass or more rarely enamel or porcelain panels. A feature of the carriage clock is it has a platform escapement, and this is what I've been working on recently, sometimes visible through the glazed aperture on the top of the case. And the clocks use a bounce and balance spring for timekeeping. And this replaced a larger pendulum that's in a bracket clock. So this is what a carriage clock is. So these are very old. This is a Mappin and Webb carriage clock. And if I just dip this forward, you're going to see the bounce complete. The escapement, the bounce, ticking away. I think this is probably a newer balance and not the original one with this old vintage clock, because you could buy or can buy replacement platform balances for carriage clocks. And if you look at the side of this clock, you can see it's a fairly simple clock. There are carriage clocks with all kinds of bells, and I'll say bells and whistles. Maybe that's where that comes from. All kinds of bells and whistles, but this is a fairly simple carriage clock. You have a mainspring. You've got a couple gears working itself up, and then there's gears that poke through the front plate and drive the hands. There's no second hand on a carriage clock, not this one anyway, and they drive a minute hand and an hour hand. So they're fairly accurate, and to actually regulate them, there's a big long regulation arm on here, and just like you would have right there, and just like you would have on a pocket watch, for example, that regulating arm moves this arm here, which has two regulating pins, and it slides it along the hairspring to speed up the clock or slow it down. I don't think this one accommodates for beat error. I don't know. You have to basically test the beat error for it, and then you have to move the collet like other clocks. So that's that. So what I want to do is have a look at this other carriage clock I have. So this is the beast I've been working on. It doesn't have its front plate, obviously, and this would be the front plate of the carriage clock. But it does have the mainspring and other gears in it, and I've got the balance and this part, the platform balance, running, so there's no issue with the platform balance. Just a few seconds ago it stopped, so there might be a gear issue here, or some dirt in a gear issue, but it stopped. But I just moved it slightly and it started again. So I don't think this will be a reliable clock. I do think that it's old, and probably a new platform would be nice for this thing, but this is the vintage one. This is the old one, so this could be more than 150 years old. I don't know. So it's got a bit of a wind on it right now, and it's running well. And the next bit of videos, you're going to see what I did to get this thing back on. I'm JD. Welcome to my channel. I put a lot of videos out lately, but this is a different kind of video. So this is one of my lathes. This is a Boley lathe. It's got a size 10 collet in it here. And what I have done is I have taken more material off the lower pivot of this platform balance. So I took this platform balance, I took it apart, I put it in the lathe here. I've mounted that in the lathe. And then what I did was I used some stones that I have for removing material. Let's have a look at those stones. So I've got two stones here I use for removing material. One of them is an Arkansas stone, and the other one, I don't know what the name of that is. So these are the stones I use for removing material. They're very fine. I was looking at the edge of this stone here to remove the material, because the pivot was too conic and it needed to be more like a stick as opposed to a cone. So I had to remove material because the conic part of the pivot was rubbing against the jewel, I believe, and not allowing the jewel to go all the way in. So that was not good. So I spent probably about 45 minutes just working on that stone. You can see there's a little black edge there, and that's where I worked on the pivot. Again, long fingernails from guitar, in case you don't know me. And this stone can remove a lot of material fast. Someone can tell me what the name of this stone is, but these are the two stones I use to remove material. And then the final bit of work I do on this particular pivot is to use this, which is a Velarobe or Velarobe, I think, from Switzerland, and it is a pivot file. So on one side you have the actual file. It's a file with, looks like any type of a file, right? The difference is the file, when it gets right to the very end, there is a rounded part to the file. Let's just get a close up here. See that rounded part? And that allows you to go inside in the pivot and work that pivot without wearing material from the cone part of the pivot, because the pivot starts out small and then it cones up like this. So it's usually cones down and then it's straight for a little while. So this allows you to work that pivot. And I didn't use this file. I used the stones in the same manner. But then when I got to the end, I've got a burnishing tool here. So again, burnishing tool, you can see the straight lines there. And you put a little oil on that, and that does the final burnish of the pivot. And it's got, when you go halfway up here, or right about here, you have that exact same thing where they've got smoothened material on that particular side halfway up, and that allows you to burnish the pivot without wearing material off where the cone starts again. What I'm going to do now is see if I can actually get this to work, and I want you to witness whether it works or not. If you look at this, the freedom of movement of this thing, it's pretty good right now. That's pretty free. There's no friction at all involved. So it should work on this particular clock. So the other thing with this clock that I know is that when I turned this to get a little bit of power, like this on the mainspring, it did provide power to the mainspring. So I'm going to put this platform balance back in right now and see whether we've got an operating balance or not. So, and there's not much of a wind, if any, on this thing, just a little baby wind on it, I think. So there's the balance. Let me just move my camera over so you guys can see what the heck is going on. There it is there. And see if I can move back a bit, get some focus. It's not just a shitty car. Actually, my wife had a Ford Focus for many years, and that thing lasted like 12 years. I call it the Dentmobile because she always parked close to everything, and it kept getting dents in it. And after a while, I just gave up and said, okay, this thing is meant to have dents. So I remember once working on the car, and I just pounded it with a hammer. Just went bam like that with a hammer. And she's like, what are you doing? I said, it's the Dentmobile. It doesn't matter. We're going to get rid of it and get nothing for it. So it matters not. So the platform balance always sits in this direction, right? So there's the platform balance is meant to be hanging. And it is I'll show you one in a few seconds. I bought one a few years back, which is a Mappin and Webb platform balance, and it is a pretty cool balance. And it was Napoleon supposedly commissioned watchmakers to make this balance so that he could have them in his carriages, and they're called carriage clocks. And this balance is in the carriage clock. So Napoleon actually commissioned the carriage clocks, not the balance. It's getting late in the day. Plus I'm using the wrong hand to turn the screw. I got to turn it with my right hand. It's funny, I'm left-handed for throwing, and I'm right-handed for everything else. So I think I was slapped by the nuns when I was young to make sure I was using the correct hand at the right time. So I think that's going in, except my screwdriver is offset. Is that right? When I get to a certain point, this thing is actually in place. I want to make sure that it is that it can run. So what I do is I reach in here, and with my finger I put a little bit of downward pressure like that on this wheel, and that allows the thing to operate. Look at that. So that's operating with a little bit of downward pressure. Now when I did work on this balance, and I took out I popped off the the actual shaft, the balance staff, and put it back on, it's a little bit off from a wobble perspective. I'm not sure how much impact that has, because this is a very old clock. I don't think there's an expectation that this thing is going to keep time. It'll keep average time, but not really good time. So let me wind this up and see if I've got something that might work. Now, I don't have a key for this balance because the gentleman did not leave me a key, but I do have this wrench. So, and it's flat faced, so it's not going to damage anything. So I'm going to hold the clock over the edge of the table and then see if I can wind it. And I'm also going to hold it sideways to give it more of a more space or platform, pardon the humor, to work with as I wind it. And I'm going to take this non-key thing and put it over the winding stem. These springs are extremely dangerous. They can be, clockmakers have lost fingers with springs. So you want to make sure that you're working in a really controlled environment when you're doing this stuff. So I'm turning this here and making sure when I stop turning it, it's latched. Every time I turn it, it's going to latch. So what I mean by that is if you look in the front here, you can see there's a latch down here. And I actually put the peg in further. As the gentleman gave it to me, the peg wasn't in it. It wasn't in that far, and I was worried that this thing slips. I'm screwed. So that's how it latches. You do that, turn it back, and make sure it latches. So I'm hoping that I start getting some action with this balance really soon. So let me see if I've got any action at all on this. I've got a bit. This is good. And remembering that this clock only works in this direction because it's a platform balance. I'll show you a really nice one I have. This is an old British one here that I've got running again. So I repivoted that balance. I'm afraid of these springs, by the way. So this will work itself in a bit better. So it might run a bit better after, but it is running. So I don't think the amplitude's that great on it. I'm not sure if the amplitude level will ever be that great on this particular clock or watch or clock, but the fact is it is running, and it probably will keep fairly good time. So it's these things are tough to work on. And again, I wasn't able to get the balance back onto the balance staff and make it absolutely flat. And I don't know whether that's going to make a difference with this particular clock. But I'm pretty happy that the power from the mainspring down here is working its way up to the platform balance, and we've got action, or we've got good movement or good action here. So now this lever in the top and the platform balance takes the regular pin and rides them along the hairspring, and that whole thing works extremely well. I think I may have the stud of my hairspring up a little too high, and lowering that may actually help the operation of the balance. So I'm going to try lowering that stud a bit. Try lowering it without actually having the stud fall down. And the reason I'm lowering it is that I've looked at if you look inside there, you can see that the hairspring looks a bit like a cone, and you don't want that at all. So I think that if I lower that, it'll work a lot better. You can see a little bit of warble on the balance there. I don't know if there's any way I can get rid of that. I'd have to disassemble everything and then try to punch the balance back onto the balance staff to see if I can get rid of that warble. But I don't know. I think it just gives it character. And again, I don't know if that warble will cause any timing issues, but this is not a plus or minus 5 seconds a day clock, okay? So I don't think there's an issue there. So if I just loosen this up a bit, I may be able to just tap that stud down a bit. And I got to do it super carefully, otherwise I'll end up throwing the hairspring onto the movement. So I just tapped it down, and I'm going to look at the hairspring and see if it's flat. So let's look at the hairspring for a second. You can see the hairspring on the top. It's no longer conic, it's completely flat. So I'm getting a good interaction there. So, and the other thing you can do to adjust these things is there's a screw here, and that screw puts pressure on that gear that has the vertical gear that provides the power to the pinion of the escape wheel. So if I just loosen that a bit, if I tighten it too much like that, it'll stop the watch. You have a little bit snug and to get the watch to run really well, and we get a good interaction between that pinion and the pinion and the gear. So I'm going to just put my hand back here so you can see what this gear looks like. Let me put the light on my camera and see if I can get a close-up of that gear. Okay, there it is there. So that's pushing that pinion, that's pushing the escape wheel, that's pushing the balance, and I think that's about as good a balance as I can make for this thing. I know if I fart with it more, it seemed to be pretty free and loose when I tested it, so I don't think farting with this balance more is going to cause it to work any better. I think it has to do with the power from the mainspring, and because I know when I put my thumb in there and I put a little pressure on that gear, this gear here, put some downward pressure on the gear, this thing will run a lot stronger. See, I can just manually push on this and it runs a hell of a lot stronger, and I'm not putting very much pressure on that at all, which means the mainspring on this watch might be, and I push on the wheel down here too, and the mainspring on this watch might need to be replaced or something, but in general it's running, it's not too bad, and maybe it'll work itself in and become a little bit better. So let me tighten the screw here because I don't think I tightened the screw yet, and make sure that's on nicely. There we go. And make sure it's still running. There we go. So I'll get a hold of Paul, who's the gentleman who dropped this off this morning, and tell him that we've got an operating platform balance. Anyway, enough videos for today, folks. Unless you want more, let me know. I do have to work on an old pocket watch soon, and the one I worked on yesterday is ready to be delivered back to its owner, its friendly owner, as we'll call him. So anyway, that's it. Thanks a lot for watching my video. Please subscribe, please hit like, and I'll keep making these videos as long as you keep wanting them. Thanks a lot.